Gopi Janna Ballabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Janna Ballabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Prajajanuranjana. Yashodanandana Prajajanuranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janna Ballabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Janna Ballabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Prajajanuranjana. Yashodanandana Prajajanuranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramhansa Prajapacharya Stutalasta Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Founder Acharya, BBT Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Nama Acharya, Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhara, Sri Vasa Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Sri Radha Krishna Gopinath, Shamakunda Radha Kunda Gira Govardhan Ki Jai, Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Sri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Srimati Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai, Transcendental Book Distribution Marathon Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada's Sankirtan Jagya Book Distribution Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta-vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Rai Krishna Vishnu Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavati Paschatya Desatharine. Hare Krishna. So this morning we are reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3. Just forgive me 1 second. I can't see. Hare Krishna. Canto 3, Chapter 1, titled Questions by Vidura. Today's text is number 42. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Sa aham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśaḥ nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ anya upalakṣyaḥ padavīṁ prasādāt carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Soham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśo nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīṁ prasādāc carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Soham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśo nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīṁ prasādāc carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Soham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśo nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīṁ prasādāc carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Soham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśo nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīṁ prasādāc carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīṁ prasādāt carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Aham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśo nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīm prasādāt carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Vaishnavis. Aham harer martya-viḍambanena dṛśo nṛṇāṁ cālayato vidhātuḥ nānyopalakṣyaḥ padavīm prasādāt carāmi paśyan gata-vismayo atra. Word meanings. Aham, therefore. Oh, it also says I. Harer, of the personality of Godhead. Martya, in this material world. Viḍāmbanena, without being recognized. Dṛśaḥ, on sight. nṛṇāṁ, of the people in general. Cālayato, bewildering. Vidhātuḥ, in order to do it. Not. Anya, other. Upalakṣyaḥ, seen by others. Padavīm, glories. Prasādāt, by the grace of. Carāmi, do travel. Paśyan, by seeing. Gata-vismayaḥ, without doubt. Atra, in this matter. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Translation: I am not astonished at this. Wait. I'm sorry. I was just pausing because what is this? It refers to the previous verse. So let me just look at the previous verse. Okay, the previous verse is about Vidura in his pure state of bhakti is still lamenting somehow for Dhritarashtra, who drove him out of his home, even though he was his well-wisher, because Dhritarashtra accepted the line of action adopted by his sons, pure materialism, pure lust, pure greed, pure envy. So now, Vidura says, I am not astonished at this, having traveled all over the world without being seen by others. The activities of the personality of Godhead, which are like those of a man in this material world, are bewildering to others. But I know of his greatness by his grace, and thus I am happy in all respects. We can repeat. I am not astonished at this. I am not astonished at this. Having traveled all over the world. Without being seen by others. The activities of the personality of Godhead, which are like those of a man in this material world, are bewildering to others. But I know of his greatness by his grace. And thus I am happy in all respects. Purport. although he was the brother of Dhritarashtra, Vidura was completely different. By the grace of Lord Krishna, he was not foolish like his brother, and thus his brother's association could not influence him. Dhritarashtra and his materialistic sons wanted to falsely lord it over the world by dint of their own strength. The Lord encouraged them in this, and thus they became more and more bewildered. But Vidura wanted to achieve sincere devotional service of the Lord, and therefore became a soul absolutely surrendered to the absolute personality of Godhead. He could realize this in the progress of his pilgrim's journey, and thus he was freed from all doubts. He was not at all sorry to be bereft of his hearth and home, because he now had experience that dependence on the mercy of the Lord is a greater freedom than so-called freedom at home. A person should not be in the renounced order of life unless he is firmly convinced of being protected by the Lord. This stage of life is explained in Bhagavad Gita as amayam sattva samshuddhi. Every living entity is factually completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. But unless one is in the pure state of existence, he cannot be established in this position. This stage of dependence is called sattva samshuddhi, or purification of one's existence. The result of such purification is exhibited in fearlessness. A devotee of the Lord, who is called Narayana Para, is never afraid of anything, because he is always aware of the fact that the Lord protects him in all circumstances. With this conviction, Vidura traveled alone, and he was not seen or recognized by any friend or foe. Thus he enjoyed freedom of life without obligation to the many duties of this world. The last paragraph. When Lord Sri Krishna was personally present in the mortal world in his eternal, blissful form of Shyamasundara, those who were not pure devotees of the Lord could not recognize him or know his glories. Avajana mamudha manushim tanum ashritam. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 11. He is always bewildering to the non-devotees, but he is always seen by the devotees by dint of their pure devotional service to him. Well, so the translation again. I am not astonished at this, having traveled all over the world without being seen by others. The activities of the personality of Godhead, which are like those of a man in this material world, are bewildering to others. But I know of his greatness by his grace, and thus I am happy in all respects. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshusun Militandjena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. So many interesting things in this chapter, which at first glance just appears to be simple questions by Vidura about great souls and family members who he knows have already departed the world. And we heard earlier Prabhupada write that therefore these questions are not practical since he knows they're all gone, but they're psychological. We should not take that description of Vidura's questions to mean that they're mundane. Hare Krishna. For example, a few years ago, one of my best devotee friends in my lifetime departed from this world. I knew he was ill, but I never expected him to depart like that. His name was Suradas, and he was a great soul, and he lived in New Dwarka, helping with BBT, book distribution, always leading kirtans and bhajans. And so, after his departure, it was so sad for all the devotees that we took an entire day at New Dwarka just to talk about him, speak about his qualities, and remember him. That's not mundane psychology. That's loving devotee psychology. That's the difference. So Vidura's questions about Krishna and Balaram and the Pandavas and all of his family members and so on, it's devotee psychology that he knows they're gone. While he was traveling, they left this world, and now he wants to talk about them and remember them. So we shouldn't think this is a mundane talking and questioning as if it's a mundane chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So now we come to Vidura asking about someone who, surprisingly, he still cares about. An enemy. This is extraordinary when you have a genuine, vicious, almost evil enemy who goes out of his way to trying to kill your family. When they were young, all the tortures that Dhritarashtra, under the influence of his son, put the Pandavas through. And Vidura had to observe and endure this harer. So he clearly, a serious enemy that brought about, incredibly, the biggest world war in history at that time. This was a true world war that he caused. So I'm just thinking in history, people who have caused world wars, especially World War II. It's not my instinct, because I'm not pure to see everyone, to ask, how is Adolf Hitler? That's not a thought or a question that would ever come out of me. But here we have Vidura questioning about someone just as evil. How is he? Well, he knows how he is. He knows he's gliding to hell. But he still has feelings. This is an amazing quality of a pure devotee, which is beyond most of our, if not all of our, levels of Krishna consciousness. He is a purified soul that when when Dhritarashtra and his sons couldn't believe that he was asking Dhritarashtra, isn't it now time to give the kingdom back to the Pandavas? They were so angry. They said, who is this? And they started insulting him, insulting his birth. And then they said, he's living so comfortably at our expense. let's just throw him into the streets. We won't kill him, but we'll throw him out like he's like the lowest of beings. So it's not something that we have perhaps a personal experience of, being in a place where we're sheltered and then we're just suddenly thrown out, although it has happened. I'm sorry to say, in our movement, it has happened. But how did Vidura react to losing that shelter is really wonderful. He took it as, finally, I am free. I have a tiny personal, just a tiny glimpse of this in my life. As you know, I changed ashrams, and I searched for a wife that I thought could help me raise money for the BBT. That was my goal. I kept saying, oh, she has to be either a banker or a lawyer. I had all these boxes I had to check off. And I found someone, and when I told her who I am and that I'm a devotee, are you willing to follow? She tried very sincerely for 3 years. And after that, well, I'll just say, every day I would go into a little small private room, close the door, and say, thank you, Krishna, Prabhupada, thank you. You've given me not what devotees think of as a nice marriage. You've actually given me a hellish marriage. And I was thanking the Lord and Srila Prabhupada. This is so wonderful. I'll never make this mistake again. That's how I thought about being, it was like being thrown out. And eventually, she asked me, you have to leave because when you retire, are you going to take care of me? And I said, I'm sorry, but no, when I retire, I'm running back to the Hare Krishna movement. You were supposed to follow me. So she said, no, I can't do that. So please, let's just have our own space. And that was 20 years ago, since I've been living alone. And I am no Vidura, but I was so appreciative. I felt such freedom. Now I can just get absorbed in Krishna consciousness on my own. No one will see me. I'll just be invisible, and I'll just try to crawl back to our movement. That's how I took it. So Vidura, when he traveled, and he describes himself as not being recognized, from a position of such exalted connection to the royal family and living in the palaces and everything, to not being recognized at all, that's a huge change in circumstance. Usually, in the material world, people are very eager to gain fame or recognition on any level. Even when we do service, we're hoping someone may notice if it's nice service and encourage us or appreciate. There's nothing wrong with appreciating the devotee service. In fact, it's glorious to appreciate every devotee's service other than your own. But to want devotees to appreciate your service, that is called ahankara. It's still a desire to be famous or to be well known. And Vidura rejected that. He rose above that. It was wonderful to not care how others see him, not want to be glorified for being such a great soul. So he traveled the world incognito, with not making sure no one would glorify him. Because sometimes for a devotee, it's painful when others glorify you. I love glorifying devotees, and I can see them shuddering. But it's such a pleasure for a devotee to glorify others, but not want it for yourself. It really is a stage of spiritual advancement to not want it. So that's how Vidura traveled. And now we come to this text. It's quite an interesting text, where he says, I'm not astonished at what happened to the Kauravas. Now that's really something to reflect on. We do not see Krishna, so we are acting on transcendental knowledge, transcendental faith, and so on. But just imagine if we lived 5,000 years ago and Krishna was in front of us with even our human limited eyes, we could see him. Well, the Kauravas were so covered by the material energy in 3 different modes of nature, primarily covered in Rajagun and Tamagun, that even with Krishna, the all-beautiful, infinitely perfect form of beauty and opulence and everything that's in Krishna's body, they're looking at Krishna and they're not seeing this as God. That to me is amazing. Face to face with God, and so many people didn't know he was God. That's really extraordinary. But then again, we have the Leela in the 10th canto, which Prabhupada gave us in the Krishna books, that Lord Brahma saw Krishna as a youth, and there was no way he could believe that was God. Staring at Krishna, and he couldn't believe it's Krishna, it's God. Even Brahma, whose intelligence is maybe 1 billion times more intelligent than anyone here or all of us combined, and he couldn't believe that little boy is God. Actually, it's one of the great meditations of all the devotees. Whenever we offer prasadām, for example, what's the final prayer we chant? Anyone want to recite it? After we chant the Prabhupada pranams and after we chant the Lord Chaitanya glorification, the Namo Mahavananaya, what comes next? Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahman Hitaya Cha Jagat Hitaya Krishnaya. Stop there a minute. Jagat Hitaya Krishnaya. That Krishna is Govindaya, a boy? It's amazing meditation that we do every time we offer prasadām. And it using an American phrase, and I apologize, the better word is escaping me. When something is so astonishing that it just blows your mind. That's what I try to feel when I chant those prayers, that, okay, I'm offering this food to Krishna. Who's Krishna? And I start thinking of Krishna is in his unlimited aishwaryas, his powers, because that's the first step in knowing Krishna, is you have to know how powerful, you have to really know that he's the supreme controller, that everything is in him, even before it manifests. I mean, these are amazing meditations about who Krishna is. And then at the end of that prayer of offering the food to Krishna, we're directed, but now think of him as a little boy. It does blow my mind to try to comprehend that God, the all-power, I love thinking of how his powers are so unlimited, could then appear for his own pleasure, just like a little boy who wants to play. This concept is unheard of in the Western world, this concept of God. Having a personality, being a person, having desires that everyone else's desires are just a perverted reflection of. Because all the pleasures and all the emotions and every type of love that is existing in Krishna before anything is manifest in this universe, it's already there. So when the universe becomes manifest, because we are tiny particles of Krishna, we're not created. Only the body is created. We eternally exist as a part of Krishna. So we have in us, in a very minute way, all these desires to be happy because Krishna has them. It's extraordinary. We loved when our body was little and we had playtime with friends, regardless of our gender or anything like that. We liked that. It was enjoyable. But Krishna's having that enjoyment for eternity. And the happiness that Krishna gets from that, I'm sorry to tell you, is about 10 million-fold greater than any happiness you've had with your friends. When you're playing, I know you're happy. Well, Krishna plays, his happiness is beyond imagination. And similarly, when boys and girls get older, they may desire the company of a boy or a girl in a different relationship because that's in Krishna. But that happiness can never last. I mean, even if you have the most ideal team and marriage in this material world, well, how long will it last? 40 years? Or 50 years, depending on when you get married? And then it's gone. But with Krishna, that enjoyment is endless. It's endless. And the amazing thing, what we read about in the Nectar Devotion and the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is, although the pleasure that Krishna is sharing with his eternal associates is, Lord Brahma said, it's 10 million-fold greater than anything we've even imagined in this universe. 10 million-fold greater. But what the Nectar Devotion and the Chaitanya Charitamrita teach us is that there's no time element in the spiritual world, okay? But for the sake of this talk, at every moment, that Ladini potency that's giving the pleasure of that exchange is expanding. We can't imagine a pleasure with no artificial stimulus that fades, that just keeps expanding. And as soon as you measure it, it's expanded again. So much so, Krishna can't even measure the pleasure that he and his devotees are experiencing, because as soon as he measures it, it's already increased. And if he tries to measure it again, it's increased again. What is going on in that spiritual world? It's so amazing that we would be attached and want to cling to material things. That's the pure mercy of our spiritual founder, Acharya, that he has given us transcendental knowledge that in a way that no one ever had. And no one ever understood like the way Prabhupada presents it, so that you have all the necessary spiritual gyan to not cling to material attachments, or if they get disrupted, to not care. But now we come to, again, this amazing phenomena. How could half the world, because it was a world, how could half the world see Krishna, hear him giving advice, hear him speaking, and not realize that he's God. He's God and they can't see it. This is really a difficult topic for us to conceive of, because we would like to think if we ever saw Krishna, we'd know who he is. But Krishna appeared 5,000 years ago, and most people maybe did not know he was God. Even even Brahma at one point didn't know he was God. That's extraordinary. Sometimes we read about the holy Dham and how Vidura visited the different Dhams and how important it is to go to the Dhams and see the Dham and take in the transcendental energy of the Dham, Krishna's abode. But factually, I'll speak for myself. I am here in Mayapur, but I'm not seeing the paths paved with glittering, amazing touchstones and gemstones, and every tree as a kalpavriksha. And I'm not seeing what's described in Goloka Vrindavan when I'm here. My eyes are so limited that even though I'm now in the Dham, but I'm not really seeing it. So in that way, I try to understand how these people could be face to face with Krishna in his eternal Satchit Ananda Vigraha and not see that that's God. If someone had not told me this is a Dham and I just came here as a visitor, I don't know that I would immediately jump to this realization, oh my God, I'm in the spiritual world. I wouldn't see that. But because Prabhupada has taught so much, we can at least try to feel that. We get the benefit of being here whether we see it or not. But at least we can try to feel what Prabhupada is telling us. So, for example, devotees sometimes come up to me. They see my bodily condition, whatever the age is and so on. So they ask, naturally, how are you? And every time they ask, I smile and say, I'm in the spiritual world. What do you mean, how am I? That's what I always answer, because I know with my spiritual intelligence, I am in the spiritual world. And by believing that and living accordingly, gradually, by grace, it may be revealed to me. If not in this life, in one of my future lives. But now we come back to the Kauravas staring at Krishna and not having an inkling. This is God. We don't have to listen to him. In fact, he's supporting the Pandavas, therefore he's also our enemy? Amazing how any time something interferes with a conditioned soul's sense enjoyment, whatever is that interference is an obstacle in my life or an enemy in my life. Automatically, the non-devotee thinks, this person has got more than me, or this person is not giving me what I want, he's my enemy. It's like a natural leap. You don't even have to think about it. It just bursts out of the conditioned soul when the conditioned soul's entire purpose in life is, how can I lord over, how can I accumulate pleasure and wealth and fame and strength and beautiful family and whatever for me. Just that mentality of I and mine is making the conditioned soul sometimes think God's my enemy. If there is a God, that's my enemy. And that's what happened with the Kauravas. As amazing to us as it sounds, they couldn't see Krishna as God, and they actually saw him as an enemy to their sense gratification. So it's a very interesting verse where Vidura is describing his thoughts about Dhritarashtra and the Kauravas. So we can stop there and ask for any comments or reflections or corrections. Anyone? Don't be shy. Hare Krishna. Because it gives us all a chance to hear and chant about Krishna if you ask questions.
Okay. Prabhuji, thank you for this wonderful class. You mentioned something about your personal life, like how you went into your wife left you and you since 20 years you are alone.
Yes.
Yes. So
I wanted
to ask about this aspect, that what is the shelter which you have taken in this 20 years of solitude that you are still practicing, In my condition, if I'm alone for 20 years, no, I feel that, the foundation may shake, So, what is it that inspired you in this solitude? What is the activity which you did, to remain under the shelter of the Lord and His devotees?
In my case, separating from the illusion of having a happy family. And I have 2 children. And for all these 20 years, from a distance, I keep paying for them. Their medical, their everything. Because that's my obligation. But separating from them instantly brought me back to what happened to me back in 1969 when I first met devotees. And 1970 when I first moved into, I immediately went back to that thought and I said, I have to crawl back. I've made so many possible or knowing mistakes. I've disturbed devotees in different ways without even wanting to. And I have so much to make up for. Surely I have so many future births waiting for me. And I started realizing today, after all those years, I can tell you that what I pray for now is remembrance. I know I'm going to have future births, but Prabhupada wrote a famous letter to Brahmananda when he asked, Prabhupada, if we don't make it all the way back to Godhead, does the spiritual master have to come back to save us? And Prabhupada wrote, yes. So, do not make me come back. An immortal famous line, right? So, my prayer, since I know I have to take more births, is Krishna. Tulsi Mani, because she awards the privilege of devotional service. Krishna, who gives remembrance. I pray the whole time I'm chanting japa, I try to pray this. Please, let me always remember Prabhupada, so that in all my future births, he never has to come back. I remember him. Now I'll just search for him. And once I can find any manifestation of him, I'll surrender and keep serving. Life after life, isn't that what we chant every Guru Puja? Janme, Janme, Prabhu say. Life after life, if I can just remember you, then maybe my future births won't be that much of a burden to you. But if Krishna gives me that grace, and it's only Krishna that can give that grace, if Krishna gives me that grace to remember you, then from the moment I take birth, if I can have that blessing, I'll look for you. And I'll try to find the Sankirtan movement. I'll try to find book distribution. And I'll try to jump in again. That's what I meditate on when I'm chanting my japa. And as far as these other 20 years go, what I tried to do, I have a little 1-bedroom where I live alone. I filled every space on the walls with the most beautiful artwork of Krishna. Prints from our BBT art department. Some of the artists gave me some originals, but mostly they're just prints. Nicely framed, so the second anyone walks into my apartment, they're not in the material world anymore. And I used to say to all my friends that come, it's like japa for the eyes. Seeing all these paintings on everywhere, in every room, I can't forget. And I have my favorite painting. I have to, due to my condition, I have to sleep in a recliner chair, not in a bed. So I've lined up this amazing painting, which is the last thing I see. I'm taking rest. The first thing I see when I open my eyes every day. And so in that way, that's how, if you want to call it living alone, I don't feel alone. And that's how I try to set up my home, so I never feel alone and never forget Krishna. Yes, dear Manaji, Hare Krishna. Oh, my dear friend, I am your servant in all respects, I am. There's a painting that Dhriti did. My home is mostly filled with Dhriti and Ramdas art, but there's a painting that Dhriti did of Radha and Krishna together under the moonlight at night. And it's such and it glows. Whenever I see Radha and Krishna, there's something about how she painted it that it's not like material, mundane. It's like the form of Radha and Krishna are glowing. And I just sit there like, wow, this is what it would be like in the spiritual world if I could see this. That's, of all the paintings, I have a lot, but that's the one I see the most. Hare Krishna. Yes, Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Very nice to hear your inspiring way of speaking after many, many years. Krishna hasn't allowed me to come back here, but I think I remember a class where you were talking about 2 points. One is that we try to get glorification ourselves.
But could you speak just a little slower?
Yes.
Because I'm not wearing my hearing aids.
Okay.
See what old age does? You need glasses, you need hearing aids. I'm sorry.
So you mentioned 2 points in the beginning, that we always tend to try and get glorification. I can relate with that. And the other point was that you take pleasure in glorifying devotees, and that's a propensity of devotees, even though devotees may not like it. I think I remember a wonderful lecture about Jayananda that inspired so many devotees that we still have on those old CD tapes. Very famous classic of very expressive glorification. Probably some of the older devotees remember those glorifications, that we never had the privilege to see that wonderful devotee, but transmitted by you in graphic detail was wonderfully uplifting. Thank you.
Does everyone know who our saint, Srimad Jayananda Prabhu, is? It was rare when one of Prabhupada's disciples left the world while he was still walking the earth. That was not, because we were mostly young. And when Prabhupada first heard the news of his departure, he wrote and said, in a very general way, what's written in Bhagavad Gita, that surely he will take birth in a super wealthy Brahminical family, maybe even in the celestial planets, because of his amazing devotional service, that he will continue in that way where he left off. But, okay, this will just take an extra minute or two to explain this. We knew that Jayananda had given up the last possible medical treatment for his condition. He had a disease which is called, in English, ALS. It is one of the most painful disorders. At the end, it's like your whole body is on fire, but you're still in it. Every cell is burning with pain, and you're still in that body. If you go into a fire, your body doesn't last very long. With this ALS pain, it just goes on. And I mean, how he could be in that, It was amazing that he had that and was suffering so much. So on his last morning, it was my habit, just on my way to the temple, to go into his room just to check on him. We had given him a room where he could look out the window on the ground floor and see us building the first Rath Yatra cart for the LA festival. Anyway, when I walked in, I knew he was in so much pain. And this is a very important lesson about remembering Krishna at the time of death, when everything in your body is not working and your mind is completely falling apart and may cling to whatever material things you've thought of in your whole life. You have no idea how to control at that moment. Am I going to think of Krishna? Or am I going to think of something material that I was attached to? It is the greatest challenge at the time of death. How are you going to think of Krishna? So anyway, this was that moment for Jayananda. He's a tall, strong-bodied devotee. He was curled up with his knees and holding them against his chest on his back and just rolling from side to side, moaning in total agony. And first of all, I'd never seen death before either, but I ran up to him and I said, Jayananda, Prabhu, this is it. You're leaving your body. This is it. That's all I could do, is just shout that. And for the next 3 minutes, I watched someone who is super beyond human, superhuman. In spite of all that pain, he first let go of his knees with his arms. And then one leg at a time. I couldn't believe he was doing this because I know the pain he was in. He was stretching out his legs. And then finally, he was able to lie back on his bed. And the last act of his life we should only be this fortunate. It's amazing. He placed his right ear on the tape recorder of Prabhupada chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. His final act, to put his head on that tape recorder in the midst of burning, searing pain. And when he had done that, that's when he left. I could see it. It was amazing. By that time, Mangal Artik was over, and we have 3 altars in New Dwarka, and the pujari for Lord Jagannath, Balaram, and Subhadra had just come off the altar and was coming over to Jayananda Prabhu's apartment, carrying the garland that Lord Jagannath wore during the Mangal Artik. It was just a divine sign. So I wrote all this in detail to Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada gave a whole different understanding of Jayananda. He wrote, I was so proud, he said, to have such a spiritual son, a disciple like Jayananda. There is no doubt he has been transferred to Vaikuntha Loka. And I want his picture on every Rath Yatra cart, in every festival, in every city throughout the world. And ever since then, that's what we've been doing to our Saint Jayananda. So he's not a normal devotee, because even in the best of circumstances, it's hard when your mind doesn't work to get it to think of Krishna. What to speak of when the mind doesn't work and you're in total agony and pain to think of Krishna. This is called, it's the 8th chapter, right? Attaining the Supreme. That's the example, that's how it's done. And we can, since we never know when that moment will come, Prabhupada Zoe said, make sure throughout your whole life you're prepared for that. So whenever it happens, and that's the story of Jayananda's disappearance back to Vaikuntha. That could be right out of the pages of the Bhagavatam, a soul going to Vaikuntha. So thank you all very much for hearing, especially about Jayananda. Dhanyavad. Namo Vishnu Raya Krishna Vreshtai Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivase Shunyavadi Vaschati Desatarine. Hare Krishna. We don't want to hear that.